I identify as a trans woman, and I'm with the Transgender Health and Wellness Center. And this is the second in a series of discussions highlighting the T in LGBT. That's sponsored by the Transgender Center and PALS, Planning Ahead for LGBT plus Seniors, which is headed by Richard Bass, and he is also the founder of that organization. So in our first discussion, we introduced our two organizations and talked about how we intersect and all that. And then we had a lively and lovely discussion on pronouns. And so today we're going to talk about drag. Is drag a drag? The complicated intersections between trans lives and drag acts. And so there's going to be so much to talk about. So we had suggested in the invitation that you watch the movie Screaming Queens, the riot at Compton Cafeteria, an occurrence that happened in 1966 in San Francisco. It's perfectly fine if you didn't see this movie. The focus of this is on a much broader issue than the movie, but we can talk about that. We can talk about the history of drag. We can talk about RuPaul. We can talk about blackface versus drag and blackface and drag. And essentially why some people see drag as blackface. And we can talk about drag as an element of gay pride, which we all know that it is. You just go to any gay pride march and there will be tons of drag queens in the parade. And so I have a lot of information and notes that I've jotted down, but I want to start with just asking the basic question, and then I will answer myself and then anyone else can after me, which is how do we define drag and what are our experiences with drag and how we feel about drag. And so I am not a supporter of drag. I think drag is misogynistic and I think it's transphobic. My personal experiences are pretty negative. I've just now really come out of the closet to argue against drag. I used to always just keep my mouth shut because there's nothing worse than getting into an argument over something that can seem very, very silly, you know, in the end, like arguing over RuPaul or whatever. But I'm struck, I'm going to stand up just for a minute. So I'm struck like the difference between how drag queens were once perceived and how they perform now. So I wore a dress just for today. So I'll stand up briefly. So here I am in my dress. And and I'm wearing earrings and I have makeup on. Well, in 1965, if I was walking down the street and looked like this, I would have been arrested and probably beaten by the police too. And I definitely would have been harassed. And so when I see drag queens in gay pride parades, I think, you know, it was people that were dressed like me that were part of queer liberation that were labeled drag queens. It wasn't the 6'4", you know, a guy with the purple hair that's 4 foot on top of his head and, you know, 3 feet of extended breasts. It was people like me. And I always wonder, you know, how did that switch get made and why? And then when I'm in a club, I try to avoid drag. When I'm in a club though, or in a queer space, out of the blue, there will be a drag queen will be there performing. And the performances to me, they're usually over sexual, and I'm in no way a prude. And then they lip sync, and I'm an accomplished musician, and so they're lip syncing a song. They look like Carol Channing or something, and everyone cheers and laughs. And I think, well, this is what gay men, in particular, want me to be, or there are gay men out there that think that this is what being trans is now. And so I always get a very uneasy, queasy feeling about it when I'm around drag. And so I will just stop there and let someone else talk. Maybe we could have a pro dragger, say something. Who wants to go? Yes, Ruth.
I have to say that I'm really glad to hear you say some of what you've said, because I have felt some of those things for quite a while. And I have friends that do drag, but I'm not a fan either. And felt that it feels very anti-feminist to me, and that hurts. So I don't know if anybody else feels this way too, but I was really happy to hear you say that, Amy.
Right, yeah. Well, I think some of the ways that it's maybe feminist is that it plays on stereotypes or of women, right? And so it's caricatures of women, and it's all the stereotypes that many women don't want to be, and so I think that's where I see it as anti-feminist. All right, maybe the counter argument to that, and I'm sure, and I want someone to make this argument, is because I don't want to make both arguments, is that it's bending gender, and overall that's a good thing for all genders, for transgender people. It's queering gender up. It's making it something outside of the binary male and female, which in the queer community, that's a given that we embrace that, or most of us do. And so, yeah, who else? Someone else talk. Your experiences, tell us.
Right. I actually look at it now from a much different perspective than I did before from our conversations. But my question, what I want to tee up is there a difference between the RuPaul type of drag, which is clearly entertainment, caricature, creative approaches, versus like a female impersonation that is there? I mean, I don't even know if that is what drag would be, when you are trying to pretend that you're a famous woman and kind of singing and dancing. And, I don't know if there's nuanced differences between the two, because if, RuPaul, it's over the top, and some is feminine, some is not. There are, now they're trying to promote more creative. The winners have not necessarily been a traditional exaggerated feminine type of performer, but they've been like, unique and odd. I think one of them was named Evie Oddly, and it was clearly not trying to be an over exaggerated take on feminism. But I wonder if there's a difference between that, whether true or nuanced. And the other thing is it adding acceptance? Is it creating exposure to people by, it becoming part of the zeitgeist, where, with RuPaul, where it's kind of demystifying it a bit? It may help with the LGBTQ plus community, but I don't think it helps with minimizing the marginalization of the trans experience by making light of the situation.
Right. Yeah. Anyone want to respond to that?
I do.
Good.
I want to respond to the second point, Michael, and that is my experience with a lot of my straight friends because before I moved to Palm Springs, I had more straight friends than I do here. It seemed to me that drag did two things. Number one, it gave the illusion that all gay men like to dress up like women in drag. Secondly, they felt that if somebody was transgendered, that means they like drag. So I hear what you're saying, Annie. I don't know if we're ever going to get rid of it. I mean, I suppose it's like, you know, you go back to the 50s and 60s when white people would portray Asians. The one I can think of is, what's his name with he used to put buck teeth in for, he was a Chinese.
Mickey Rooney?
No, the one that had
Breakfast
the
at
marathon.
Tiffany's?
Jerry Lewis.
Jerry Lewis. He used to have buck teeth.
Right.
He played a Chinaman. And I think we become more sensitive to that as time goes on. But my biggest issue, because I can see the value. I love RuPaul. But I think the problem is, as a society, we're not prepared to say, well, that's just entertainment. And we're not prepared to say, well, I think all gay men like to dress up as women and they're effeminate, which is
Right.
the farthest from the truth you could imagine. But to a straight person, it isn't. And secondly, what hurts even more is that when you get a comment, transgendered, oh, you like cross-dressing, right? It's like, oh my God. So that's my point.
Yeah. Right. So as a trans woman, I've been asked to do drag several times, not here, of course, but in San Francisco in particular. And I think that's a familiar experience for a lot of trans women, that assumption is made. And the last time I was asked, I had gone into a bar in the Castro in San Francisco, and I had this real nice jacket that was all fake furry around my shoulders or whatever, but I was just wearing jeans and, you know, a regular blouse under that. And I think it's just because I came in and there I was, you know, with a furry jacket, that immediately some manager of a club was like, hey, you got to come to my club and do drag. And it's like, I don't do drag. You know? And so I don't, it's something that, and you know, we talk about trans women, of course, in drag, but there are also drag kings out there that we can talk about later. But I think it's safe to say that it's primarily drag queens. There are more drag queens than there are drag kings. I think that's fair to say.
What is the difference?
Yeah.
What is the difference between a king and a queen?
Yeah.
I'm asking a question.
Oh, what's the difference?
Yes.
Well, drag queen would be a woman performing as a male.
Okay.
Yeah, and in San Francisco, they actually have a contest every year, and to, you know, drag king, not queen, of the year in San Francisco. And the shows are lovely. They're just really well done, and the people performing are so talented, and it goes a lot beyond just lip syncing and stuff. They do little skits and stuff that I think Michael had talked about in RuPaul does stuff like that. So anyway, yeah.
I would like to add something.
Yeah, Jamie.
Well, you know, I think that maybe sometimes terminology can get in the way. And so, you know, what do drag queens, cross-dressers, and transgender women all have in common? Well, we all wear women's clothing. But what motivates us to wear women's clothing is very, very different. Drag queens and cross-dressers aren't necessarily transgender because they don't identify, you know, for the rest of their life with a gender different from their sex that they were assigned at birth. Transgender women are unique in that, you know, our motivation for dressing in women's clothing is because we're dressing in the gender that we identify with. So I think that, you know, that distinction between, because, you know, it's kind of offensive, you know, because what you're doing is, if you're telling me, if you misgender me as a drag queen, then you're telling me that you think I'm a man. And it's a microaggression. and it really stings. So the most important thing is to understand that, you know, drag queens and cross-dressers identify with the sex they were assigned at birth. They're not trans. They're cisgender people who, either because of entertainment value or because of either sexual gratification or, you know, just anxiety relief or something like that, you know, dress in clothing different from the sex that they were assigned at birth. So while I have to balance, you know, please don't misgender me by calling me a drag queen, because that's kind of offensive to me. I also have to realize that as a transgender woman, I've also been excluded from lesbian conversations by trans exclusionary feminists. And I don't want us to run the risk of taking cross-dressers or drag queens and kind of excluding them from our community, because if we do that, we're guilty of what's happening to us too as well. So I don't want us to kind of, you know, as transgender women specifically, to turn our backs on our, you know, on our very strong allies, which in many cases are our cross-dressers and our drag queens.
Right.
Jamie, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Okay, Jamie, do you think that it's more prevalent that straight men don't understand transgendered versus gay men?
Oh, no, it's been my experience, Andy, that's, yeah, straight men do not understand. And, you know, early on, I felt like it was my responsibility to educate them about the transgender community. But, you know, after you've been out on the dating scene for a while, I'm just, you know, my first, you know, have you dated a transgender person? What's your experience dating us? Because I don't want to have to, like, you know, explain everything from the ground up. And then, you know, if you find out that I'm pre-op, or if I have a vulvoplasty instead of a vaginoplasty, you just ghost me. So.
Right. I hear you.
Yeah,
Yeah, please. Yes.
I'm not, oh, for me or for?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I can express myself. I'm squirming a little bit.
That's fine.
And, you know, as a gay man, I think all gay men, we know we've got, or we feel we've got a feminine side, and it's a matter of how is that coming out? Now, you know, if we go to the tea dance and then we have a lot of pain who gets up there and has the most magnificent clothes, and gets up on the balcony. Now, my housemate here, when she gets up there, he turns his back. I mean, he says, this is so demeaning to women. And I'm like, but you know, I just, to me, it's entertainment. I can see, I mean, I would never kind of get a trans person and a drag person. I mean, they're just completely separate elements. I mean, I have done, I mean, any drag that I do in a performance, I wouldn't dare try to look like a woman. I do little girls and I do very old ladies. And that's because I guess I fear that. So anyway, I mean, I understand. It's kind of like the whole thing with the football teams, you know, that having to change the names. And I'm just worried that I'm not going to be able to catch up to the correct political correctness.
So do you do drag? Is that what you just said? So you do drag? So
well,
you.
No, I just done it like at gay retreats. I would never.
Okay.
All right. Well, what does that give you pleasure to do drag? And I mean, do you like doing it? Let me phrase it just more innocuous term. And what kind of, why do you like it? Or
well, again, I've got a performer in me.
Okay, all right.
And I will only really express it if I feel that the audience is going to be supportive. And so I'll only do it at gay retreats pretty much.
Right.
I want to speak to the terminology.
Right in that I do it to get a laugh. And maybe that's where the rub is. I don't know.
It's kind of blackface. Yeah, it's kind of blackface.
Right, so I want to kind of do a check here. We have lots of people that want to comment, which is great.
Right.
And I think we can have Kurt and then Frank, and then I think I saw Ruth.
Hi, this is Paul, Kurt's husband.
Oh, sorry, Paul.
That's okay. So I'm a liberation person. I think people should wear anything that they want to. If I had my druthers, I would be naked most of the time.
Yay!
Well, I guess Frank goes next. I just want to say that I've been a photographer since I was age 7, and well, that was 70 years ago. But for the last 20 years, I shot on the gay scene in Chicago, where I got to shoot at bars, restaurants, fundraisers, whatever. And I had, and this is my frustration and confusion. I understood what female impersonators were. They started in Berlin, I think, whatever the story was, and I understood that. And then I started seeing the drag queens in Chicago, and one of them, or one of them, actually, I got involved with her partner, who we worked together on the census in 2020 and 2000, and her name was Tiffany Todd, and she came from, I guess, Pasadena, but she told me something that really confused me, because she was a female impersonator, and her comment was, drag queens are the walking wounded of the gay community. So that's been sticking in my head forever. But then I know intimately well Chi Chi LaRue, who's a drag queen porn director, very successful. I've also been to Tulsa shooting there because I was working there on an assignment for something else, and went out to the bars and took pictures and ran across a whole bunch of drag queens that were not clowns, but were, acting professionally, whatever that is. So there's a lot of confusion. I mean, there's a lot of confusion here that, please, there's a lot of confusion here. And I really don't give a rat's whatever, because it doesn't make that much difference to me. But that's the way it goes. Anyway, thank you so much. I have to take this call.
All right, Ruth. I think Ruth and then Richard. Sorry.
Yes. The way I'm seeing it and hearing it is, I'm not a trans woman. I'm a cisgender woman, and what I think is happening is that the trans women that I know, including those that are here, are women, and drag queens are men.
Yes.
And that's a big difference, because to me, a trans woman is a woman, period. And drag queens are men pretending to be women. And it is offensive that way.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Richard was, oh, Michael, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I'm going to let Annie, I'll let you, because I think we were in a really fabulous conversation. So I think people were raising a hand. So I'll let you kind of step back.
Yeah, whoever wants to go, go.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you. But
it's all great.
Well, I would like, I would like to respond to something that Rob said, because it's something that I've heard before, Rob, and especially from more mature gay men, is that, and, I think Kurt said, or Paul said, why can't, we're all just queer. And, these are really good, valid points too, as well. I mean, it was all so much easier in 1978, but now we've got ace for asexual and bi for bisexual and pan and cisgender and heteronormative behavior and gender dysphoria and gender expression and gender fluid, gender identity and gender non-conforming and gender queer. And, we can just go on and on. So, are we splitting hairs too much? And this is a very valid argument. I think the answer to this question is more generational than it is maybe necessarily queer community versus straight community. Because if you go onto a lot of Facebook pages or a lot of Instagram or TikTok accounts or Tumblr accounts, and you see Gen Zs and millennials, they'll say, well, I'm a pansexual, panromantic, feminine expressing transgender female. And you're thinking, what? But it really, what they're doing is they're telling you a whole lot about their 5 intersecting identities too as well. So I know it's a little bit difficult for those of us, you know, who didn't really learn it that way, but I think it is kind of important, especially to younger queer people too as well. It's just a way, I'm pan, poly, panromantic, and it's just a way of kind of saying at the very beginning, before you even swipe right on me, this is kind of who I am in shorthand form.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, I think you know, a lot of it too is, and you had mentioned this, Jamie, is just language. I mean, we have evolved so much from drag queen to refer to just transgender people, and transvestites or trannies and she-males. And by the way, RuPaul has used to use the word tranny, and I think she-male for sure. And I think that language has evolved and it still gets used, you know, by people. I was with months ago with having dinner with a gay guy in, here's a real story, in Lulu's when it was still open, the outside patio. And so this is a guy, I don't want to identify him, of course, and he's in his 50s or so, and a really good looking, gender non-conforming person who I think was assigned male at birth probably. Came in, and this is a gorgeous young 20-something person. And the guy I was with said, oh, look at him. Do you think he's a tranny? And I was like, you can't use that word tranny. And he's like, why? And, you know, and I tried to explain to him that it was a derogatory term these days, you know, for gender non-conforming people and trans people. And then he ended up talking about it again and using that word because he was just, you know, stuck with that word to define that. And so, and I don't know how you get that language to evolve faster maybe than it is. I think it's, you know, we're obviously trans people have, you know, come a long way, you know, but, and we have and I think the tension, I don't want to ramble on, but the tension seems to be, for me, you know, drag queens as just harmless entertainment, and drag queens as being strong allies, as Jamie has mentioned, for the trans community. But then also that sometimes it's just very hurtful and personal, you know, that it just kind of hurts. And so I don't know how we reconcile that. Jamie had mentioned age. I don't know if younger people are embracing drag. They go to drag shows. I have no idea. I'm not, you know, I mean, a lot of drag shows are in clubs and I haven't been clubbing. So I don't know. If someone knows, please join in. So yeah, so maybe it's just a language thing. Who else wants to talk on this issue? And then maybe we can go on to another topic. Go ahead, Jamie.
Well, I think Richard had his hand up.
Oh, Richard, sorry. Yes, Richard.
No, that's okay. There's a lot that this stimulates. I like to get into drag. I haven't for a while, but I've always been really interested in the politics and the psychology of clothing. And in terms of the psychology, when I'm in a dress, I can't act like a man. So it brings out a whole personality. And I find it very fascinating. There is a psychology theory that you know says we have a lot of people inside of us, and the more people that we bring out, the less lonely we'll be. So there's a whole psychology to it, in addition to the politics. But you ask about how we can reconcile. I don't know. I've never heard a woman's point of view towards drag, and so this is very illuminating to me. And I'm thinking about the movie, The Screaming Queens. I got very confused because everyone wasn't a queen,
Right.
right? There were transgender people. So, I mean, who were they talking about? Type of thing.
And I'm going to get to that. That's a whole kind of new
Was that a
one.
whole other conversation?
Yeah, but no,
Okay.
but I'm glad you brought it up. I think before we go there, Michael, I think has some.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to this one thing that Jamie said that stuck with me, and it ties into what Richard was saying. You mentioned that you wear women's clothes. You're a woman that wears clothes. You probably sometimes wear gender neutral clothes. You're a woman. So it's not about the clothes that you wear, it's about who you are. So it's like, the difference with drag is these are people that may identify as, a cisgender male that dress up, but it's a completely different experience because it doesn't matter what clothes you're wearing as a woman, those are your clothes, and the clothes don't define who you are. Maybe outwardly to society they do. So it was interesting when you said that. I thought to myself, it doesn't matter what type of clothing you're wearing, you're a woman. And so it's interesting, the psychology, Richard, as you said, of the clothes that is how you present. So I just thought that was an interesting point of conversation.
Right.
I have a comment, Annie.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then
Well,
Nolan.
just to get to Jamie and Michael's point, drag queens tend to exaggerate the dress of a woman.
Right.
With big earrings, big hair. And I think that was the confusing part, unfortunately, in Screaming Queens, because some of the transgendered women were dressing like drag queens, if you know what I mean. They weren't dressing as women, typical normal woman's wear. They were exaggerating the look. And that's why they were all lumped in together as being drag queens. In some respects, that does hurt the transgender community because, again, they say, oh, well, you like to dress up like a drag queen. Whereas I think most transgendered people just like to dress what's comfortable. They're not out there trying to make a statement. If anything, they're trying to be under the radar. That was one thing. I did like the movie, but I thought it gave the wrong impression because there were a couple transgendered girls that dressed to me like drag queens.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. I saw it both ways. I was struck, if we're going on to the movie now, and for those of you who have not seen it, it's a short documentary about some trans people and drag queens getting sick of police harassment in the Tenderloin in San Francisco in 1966. And so the police come into this cafeteria to arrest the female impersonators and to harass them. And one of the girls throws a cup of coffee in the cop's face, and it turns into a huge riot. And a lot of people get arrested. And from that, there were organizations that were developed to help trans people or help the drag queens or whatever. And it was a part of the overall, queer liberation as well. And this is like 3 years before Stonewall. And it's an interesting documentary because it's low budget and it's just a little time and space in San Francisco. The cafeteria is no longer there. You would never know this happened. And the news media didn't cover it. And there were no police reports about it now. And it was just an event that happened that really did change a lot of things, not as much as Stonewall, of course, but quite a bit. It was a precursor to that. Just like in 1959, there was a small riot at a donut shop in LA with so-called drag queens. But that was a long beginning to make a point. I was struck at the beginning where they talk about this is homosexual San Francisco, where the drag queens and the transvestites and the hookers, da, 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 da. And they're showing, for me, Andy, they were showing just like trans people just wearing sensible blouses and pants. Now later on, it's a little bit different, but right at the beginning, you're like, well, they just look like, women, if you, so I don't know. Yeah. So it's very interesting to me what was considered a drag queen back then, that term, let's just focus on that term, and then what is considered a drag queen now. I mean, they're totally different. And so as I said before, maybe it's a language thing. Who else wants to talk about the movie a little bit?
Well, I think sort of going off with that, that the definition of drag queen has changed.
Right.
I think today a drag queen is a male entertainer dressed up in overly
Larger than life.
larger than life female attire.
Right.
And and evidently back in the 50s and 60s, a drag queen was referred to any cis male who dressed in female attire.
Right.
Whether they thought of themselves as being really I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, or I'm a man just out there looking cross-dressing.
Well, and also I'll add, I think the lines were very tightly drawn. Certainly, if you go back to the 50s and the 60s, what was acceptable for a man to wear, what was acceptable for a woman to wear. For a woman to wear jeans in the 50s, I think was scandalous in a lot of areas. And so anything that went beyond these very narrow areas was going to be suspect. And so that I think figures into things as well, things we wouldn't consider a drag queen today. But if you were a woman with sort of or a trans person wearing maybe sort of a fluffier blouse that didn't look like some off the rack shirt, well, you're suspect, and therefore maybe you're a drag queen. You're not wearing 3 pieces of the correct clothing, then maybe you're a drag queen, just sort of by default.
But yeah, and also, I mean, sort of touching back on the movie.
Yes.
I mean, my initial thought was, these certainly are not drag queens, and I wouldn't, I would say most of the women in the movie presented as women.
Right.
I mean, they looked like the women that you would see, shopping on, on Palm Canyon. I mean, they certainly didn't look like, effeminate men, and they certainly presented as women, and and I would have considered them, certainly now to be women.
Right. Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I found the introduction that you mentioned, that little newsreel, this is where the homosexuals live and all.
Right.
It was so horrifying. But you know what? That's the society we lived in.
Right.
In 1940s and 50s and the 60s.
Right.
That is how we lived. That was surrounding us. The attitude is horrifying. And
Could I
back to think that that's what we lived in.
And
could I pop in? I don't have a hand or a whatever.
nice pool.
Yes. First, I agree, Richard, that I saw words that I hadn't heard in decades, degraded and whatever, perverted and all that kind of thing. Thankfully, we've moved forward. But, when we were talking about the typical women's dress, let's not forget the men's typical clothing either. I'll never forget, I lived nearby, but the president of Ford Motor Company, who was the son of Henry Ford, said any man who wears tight pants is a homosexual. And remember those balloon-like pants that they put the belt sort of in the middle of the stomach chest area, and they ballooned way out, and they were pretty much could accommodate 2 men? That was considered the right dress for men at the time.
You know,
Right.
Yeah.
I also, back to the movie and along these lines, what struck me is how much progress we've made, but how little progress we've made. Because what you're saying, Richard, in the 50s and 60s, is still happening in parts of this country and definitely parts of the world, that the LGBTQ plus community is still struggling. And, you know, and also within the trans community, I remember one of the trans women saying she had an easy life because she could pass or she could perform as a showgirl. You know, other trans women didn't have that and had to, you know, earn money different ways. And it struck me as you read, and it still happens, unfortunately, to this day, 50, 60 years later, that it's still so hard for so many people in the trans community to just be themselves and get a job and live their life. And I wish we've made more progress than we have, even though we have made some.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. That there needs to be more progress. I'm struck. I think one of the themes that I draw from the movie as a trans person, from the documentary, the film, is that the contributions of trans people to overall what I'm calling queer liberation or LGBT plus liberation, I don't think have been recognized as much as they should have been. Of course, with Stonewall, we have 2 so-called drag queens. They called themselves SAD, and they called themselves transvestites. And that was Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, and who were right there at the, you know, in the marches of the street. They were, you know, leading the march and throwing bricks through the windows supposedly and all that, although that's under dispute. But in the movie, it's the same thing. It was like the drag queens were getting harassed, or the trans people were getting harassed, sure, but so were so was the gay community just in general. You couldn't, I don't know about San Francisco, but there were places like in New York where 2 people couldn't, of the same sex, couldn't dance together, where they served liquor. So there had to, you know, there was all these crazy laws. And so finally it took, you know, trans people were right there. And I'm not saying that they were the most important element of gay or queer liberation or whatever, but they were right in the middle. And then somehow whoever talked about how the definition has changed of drag queen, I think that's true so much, but I think we've lost something. We've lost the history, our trans history, through that. Does that make sense? Through that change in definition? You know, it's like, well, it's the drag queens that did this, you know, and helped with queer liberation. And then what comes to mind is, you know, what we think of today as a drag queen, not what appears in the movie, which people that, you know, that are actually trans and talk in the movie about, you know, finally being able to get hormones and finally able to, you know, have surgeries and things like that. So, I mean, that's what I take away from it. I mean, it was never recorded, you know, by the newspaper. There was even a police report on it, or maybe they've been lost. So, yeah. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'd like to add something.
Much as you guys.
I'd like to add something toward that end, and that's regarding androgyny. And I think there was a period of time just immediately after this, from about 1968 maybe to about 1974, 75, where androgyny was I don't want to say celebrated because that's not quite true. But there was certainly much more room for androgyny in the gay men's community.
Right.
When you get to about 1975 and you start having more of that Castro clone sort of look, and things become, we're going to outbutch the straight men, that goes away. Not completely, but for the most part, that goes away. In the women's community, you had androgyny was definitely the thing. Sorry, androgyny was definitely um, the goal. You were supposed to not look like a man and not look like a woman. Femme was kind of out, butch was kind of out, everybody was kind of the same. And that probably went on, I would say through about the mid 80s. And then that started to go away, and then you started to have more of this delineation of well, kind of everything went after that point, but you could be a femme and that was okay. Or you
Right.
could be a butch and that was okay. But you didn't have to necessarily do either one. But for that period of about 10, 15 years, the goal was everybody was kind of supposed to look the same. And it wasn't really very pretty. It wasn't a pretty look on most people.
Right. Okay. Who wants to comment about the movie? Anything about the film? I can make a final comment about the film. I just think that it shows that you really have to take action to get things done. You have to throw the sugar shaker through the window of a cafeteria and to stir things up before people will pay attention to you. And I think that's what the movie shows beyond all this nuanced stuff that I'm talking about. Yeah.
Well, interestingly, about 6 years after the riot, the cafeteria fell on hard times and closed. And what that tells me is the participants liberated themselves from the closet of the cafeteria and came out into the streets and claimed them. And I just want to say that we all benefit from the leadership of, both the people at Stonewall, people here. I heard mentioned 1959 in Los Angeles. We might not be where we're at today if they hadn't been leaders. And the trans community, the lesbian community has been a big part of that leadership.
Right. I agree. Thank you. Anyone else on this?
I just wanted to say one thing. First of all, I appreciate you guys letting me sit in. And second of all, I think it was really, really helpful. And I think it's really a great joining of the PALS community and the trans community too as well, to kind of foster this kind of collaborative dialogue. It's really just so important for understanding too as well. I mean, I didn't know until Kurt told me about, the years when everybody dressed this way and then everybody was bears and then everybody were twins. I don't really know, but I don't know. So this kind of collaborative dialogue is really, really helpful, hopefully for you guys, but definitely for us too as well. And I just want to mention one more thing for a topic of future consideration for your group, and that's the gender nonconforming community. Transgender people are the fastest growing demographic in the United States. And it's been estimated that we're going to double in size over the past 10 years from 2011 to 2011. But the fastest growing subdemographic of the trans community is the gender nonconforming community. And there are a whole bunch of really young people that they don't identify with either binary, and they're in the middle. And I think that they're the people that are really, they're struggling right now. And these are young people that are struggling too as well. So I just hope that we can kind of have a conversation about gender nonconforming and non-binary people too as well, because there's more of them coming down the pipeline.
Right. We had talked about that a little bit last time about pronouns and no. I mean, it's a whole nother session, Jamie, as you know, to talk about non-binary people and why so many people are, expressing that gender. And has it always been there and it's just now coming out, or has something else, happened to create that? But I so agree with you that, I mean, that's the fastest growing one, and it's really knocked everyone for a loop. I mean, everyone here, like we're all open-minded and all that, and suddenly we're dealing with pronouns of non-binary people, and it's so hard to do a lot of times, the they them. And so yeah, I mean, that's a point that's well taken. Does anyone else want to talk about the movie? I want to talk about another topic. So anything else on the film? Michael?
No, I would say Nolan maybe, but.
Okay, all right. So this is, I don't know how much time we want to spend on this. So we have about a half an hour. So let's go spend a half an hour on it. But I want to talk about the relationship between blackface and drag, because academics have made this argument that drag is a form of blackface. And of course, there's been a backlash against that, especially from the African-American community, who would argue that no way, that it's not anything compared to blackface. But the arguments are essentially that blackface and drag are the same, because it's the more powerful people taking on the roles of less privileged people. In modern day drag, I don't know if that's so much the case, but you can see that in films like Tootsie and Bosom Buddies. Wasn't that a television show? And Flip Wilson, if you remember. And and drag and blackface all exclude the impersonated people. So RuPaul says, well, I don't want trans people to do drag on my show. That has changed, as most of us know, maybe. But at one point, that's where it was. And then drag and blackface showed the stereotypes and the behavior. I mean, it's singing and dancing, and it's the exaggerated sexuality. And you see it with blackface, the big lips and the way of speech. And with drag, of course, it's the big breasts and the big hair. And then there is an argument that I have read by an academic that there's also a paternal aspect to blackface and drag, where it's like, we're going to show you what it's like to be a African-American or a woman, and we're going to show you all this stuff, and you don't have to be afraid of it. You don't have to be afraid of these women with big breasts, or and I'm not trying to diminish blackface in any way or trying to conflate the two of them, but I just wonder what everyone's idea is about that. Is it too far to say that drag and blackface are the same? Because obviously a blackface is a terrible thing, that is a terrible chapter in our history. Is that too much? Or the similarities enough to where we can say, let's do away with drag like we did away with blackface? I know that's very controversial, but why not? So who wants to talk about that?
Go ahead. To be honest with you, before you brought it up, I never associated the two.
Right.
But after you brought it up, I mean, to me, it's crystal clear that they're basically the same thing. I mean, they're taking an identity that you're not, and usually they portray that identity in a humorous way, whether it's big lips, it's exaggerating the features, and it's done for comedic or it's entertainment value. But I see how it's demeaning to both. So, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. To me, I think it's an issue. I have no problem with that. I think definitely it is an issue.
Okay. Who else? All right. Yes, please.
I don't know if the original intention, maybe not, but
Bob, you'll be next. Go ahead, Deborah.
blackface and drag are offensive to the women, to the people that they are imitating. Blackface is very insulting to African-American people, maybe not way back, but it certainly is now. And I think the same thing is about drag. It is exaggerating far too much for women to be comfortable about it.
But Ruth, let me take a little exception with that.
Sure.
People like Cher that say she loves people that impersonate her. So I don't think every woman feels that way. I do. I think it's demeaning, but I think there are a lot of people in entertainment that are flattered by people doing that. And I know Cher is one of them.
Well, because there's so many drag queens that imitate her. So
Yeah.
to say imitation is the greatest form of flattery.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, Robbie, you were going to talk. Go ahead.
well, I'm still shaking in my boots here. I mean, I can remember when I was 6, 7, 8, and 9, I wanted to be a girl. I wanted to be a girl. I'd play with my sisters and their friends, and I would jump rope and play dolls and play house. My father would see me, he'd scoop me up, and I'd go to the baseball diamond or the football field. And then, so I've never really thought that there was a time in my life where I just wanted to be a girl. And I guess because there were fewer female to male, I knew that men had a privilege then, but I was willing to give that up. I guess I don't understand why I don't see as many female to male transgender. But the main thing is I look at drag, I have looked at drag as an incredible art form. When I see what they can do with makeup, I am in awe. I mean, it's like a palette, it's like art. And so I don't know, I just, let me die before it's out, before it's off the table forever, okay?
Well, that's so dramatic.
Oh my God.
I also think, I think part of this is just giving everybody perspective. I've had a journey about understanding the trans community. When I first came out as a gay man, I didn't understand it. I didn't necessarily understand the connection of the LGBT. But as I got older and became more aware, I understood the perspective and the importance of us all being one community. So whether you want to enjoy drag, you don't have to, my perspective, don't have to stop enjoying it, but just understand the perspective of the trans community when performers or people are kind of making light of their journey. And I think that's what it is, just being more aware of it. So,
Michael, I don't think drag or impersonators are making fun of transgender journey. They're making fun of how women look.
Yeah,
how women act and sing.
True.
I don't think their intent is to go out on stage and say, I'm making fun of a transgender.
You're right. That's a good point of clarification. You're right.
Yeah.
So from the point of view, if we're learning some sensitivity regarding transgender people, or a transgender woman, don't call me a drag queen. I am not a drag queen, right?
Or a cross-dresser.
Right, or a cross-dresser. I'm not in this for a laugh. This is me. Now, if a transgender man, they don't have the same problem, right? I mean, don't call me a drag queen. Well, you're not going to call a man a drag queen.
Drag king.
Women don't dress up as men.
Yes, they
Get
do.
into drag as men.
They do.
Well, they do, but it's, so what's the sensitivity regarding drag and a transgender man?
Am I supposed to open my mouth? I spent 16 very happy years with an in the closet F to M as my partner, as I hope a soft butch, where, because I'm always different, you know, Richard.
Yeah.
And as she started transitioning, I mean, she left me, but I mean, I went, if any of the trans know about the Southern Comfort, and I went looking as feminine as I could, thinking to be supportive of my partner. And
Right.
then there were 40 F to M's, and there were 400 males to female, whether they were cross dressers, they were whatever, transgender, whatever they were. And I didn't know what they were perceiving me as. Was I a woman trying to look like a woman, or was I a man trying to look like a woman? I had my nails done, but I used to do that. So it was tremendously, that weekend was very uncomfortable. But when we would travel, I wouldn't give up my identity, so that we both wore tuxes on straight cruises. And eventually we danced together. Not right, well, yeah, we danced together with slow dances too. And everybody was very accepting, but she was really in the closet because nobody knew she was actually transgender. Everybody thought she was just gay. So mine is always an unusual story.
Right. Oh, it's a wonderful story.
It
It's
is.
a wonderful story.
And
It just makes you think that everyone has to give an explanation of who you are. You know, people just don't let you be who you are and just let it be that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I agonized for her because, and I know Ruth would like me to say him, but for other reasons, and she knows I will not do that. But yeah, just to be accepted, and just to, we would go to gay couples women's group, and they would talk about how much they hated the transgender. And I would sit there and agonize for her, because if she ever said anything, immediately she would be hated. Just as I always felt, if you told anybody you were gay, you would be hated. And sometimes it was true.
But it was true. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm of that age as well. I mean, so being in the closet, keeping your job, and not saying who you are, for the most part, was normal in those days. So
It was a point of survival, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. So
Do you know one movie, I think it's on Amazon right now, Disclosure, movie called Disclosure. It's very powerful. It's a documentary interviewing transgender men and women, and their relationship to the media and how they felt about themselves. Oh, it's just devastating how difficult it is when all you see are these freakish cross-dressing in the media and movies,
Right.
and trying to be your authentic self at the same time. So wonderful vision, point of view of a transgender experience.
Yeah, you're right, Richard. I saw Disclosure. It's excellent. And the thing that moved me the most, I hadn't really thought about it, but remember when they showed you clips from movies about guys that found out they were on a date or kissed a man dressed up as a woman?
Yeah.
And the response was they were going to throw up. They go, oh my God, I'll kill myself. The reaction to finding out that you were with a transgendered person or somebody that was portraying themselves as female, the reaction in Hollywood was, that was sickening. And so I had forgotten how that's portrayed. So it's a great movie. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's a wonderful documentary. And also Transfood is a good one too, that's out on HBO. going back to what Andy was talking about, yeah, an example of that is the movie Crying Game. Are you familiar with that?
Oh,
movie?
yeah, my goodness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the protagonist male kisses a trans woman, but he doesn't know it's a trans woman, and then later finds out it is a trans woman, and then he has to go. If you can remember this scene, he goes and takes a shower. He vomits. He takes a shower. You know, it's this whole big thing because he's just kissing, just one kiss. And then Saturday Night Live, when the movie came out, did a whole skit on that, you know, and of course they were mocking it and saying, you know, this is silly or whatever, but that just perpetuated the whole thing. And disclosure shows that with the Crying Game. So yeah, but getting back to drag, here's a question maybe we can deal with this one a little bit. Does drag have redeeming value? I know some people, I hear support for drag here among people here. So what is the redeeming value? And of course that may touch upon the whole aesthetic question of whether art should have value or not, right? But is there a redeeming value to drag? Is there any kind of moral center to it?
You know, hi, thank you for inviting me to come to this group. I'm from Imperial County, CEO of the Imperial Valley LGBT Resource Center. And on that topic, since the beginning, when we first started and we were thinking about fundraisers, it was a drag queen who actually came and said, we'd like you to help you raise funds. And they put on a show for us and have been putting on shows on our behalf since we started. And people want to attend drag shows. And Imperial County didn't really see much of that until we opened up. And all I can say is that I appreciate them very, very much for doing what they do for the sake of bringing in some funds to our center. But on the other hand, I've also experienced, and I had to learn very quick, the big difference between the trans population and the drag queens. When we started doing transgender support groups, they showed up to the groups, and I see how dominant they are. And they were basically taking over the groups, making some of the trans folks that were attending the group more shy and didn't want to talk because they basically overpowered the group to the point where we had to separate them. Because they talk about makeup and hair and the whole deal, and they weren't really, I could see that they really weren't understanding the experience that our trans folk were experiencing, which was more personal, relational, family, etc. So I saw that big difference, and right away I realized that where they're coming from is much different than where our trans folks are coming from, and it's two different things. I appreciate them very much for their art, but at the same time, it is temporary. It's temporary. It's fantasy. It's exciting. People want to pay to see them, but they can leave it. Unlike those that are, it's a life experience.
Right. So what I heard from that is, if I reduce it to the question, but thank you so much for sharing. It's so important. Is that in one way that it has redeeming value, drag, is that drag queens are strong allies to the LGBT community. And they do, you know, not to be crass about it, but they do raise money, you know, because people come to see a good drag show. And I, you know, like in San Francisco, and often, you know, they're taking tips, and often that money, you know, goes for good causes and all that. So yes, I agree with that. So what other things about drag has value?
Well, the Rainbow Alliance, which gay straight alliances, and the through the schools, the questioning and the they have a big party, a big gathering, and then just before the virus, and the drag queens are coming in and entertaining these young kids who are questioning, and I
Right.
think there's a value to it. There's a value to everybody as far as I'm concerned. So, and everybody has a different place, and they are performing and doing good there too, in giving acceptance and understanding to the kids.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying, or let me reduce what you said, is that it challenges gender, right? So it celebrates bending gender. Drag does. So drag queens come into schools or whatever, and kids can see, oh, you know, men, women, it all gets, you know, kind of messy and wonderful in their minds, and you know, it expands their ideas of gender and all that. So that's I'm probably distorting what you said.
Yeah.
But that's what I hear from it. And so yeah, so the allies, and then bending gender, and yeah, very good. Yeah, what else? Who else? What else is value?
Ruth?
What else, other value?
Ruth?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about what Barbara said, and I've been to the Rainbow Summit, you know, every year also. And there's one particular drag queen in town who is just wonderful and does a lot of stuff for the kids. So, you know, our answers are kids interested in drag, are younger people. I think the answer is yes. They're also interested in the mechanics of doing drag. I mean, this is Bella the Ball that does it, and he gives lessons in how to do makeup to the kids, and they love it. They really enjoy it. So I think it's got a future in the LGBTQ community, but I think with the kids so much, it just like they really, it's fun, and they just enjoyed that aspect of it.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Along those lines, I used to play music at the farmers market in Castro. If anyone's familiar with that, I think it's every Wednesdays or Tuesdays or whatever. And I lived real close to that, and so I would have my regular times of playing, but then people would, you know, not show up, and so someone would, you know, text me and say, "Hey, can you play?" And there was a drag queen there at the farmers market that did things with kids, and balloons and drawings and a little bit of makeup and all that, and she was, I don't know how she defined, so I'll just use neutral things, but they were neutral pronouns, but they were just so wonderful, and the parents were so supportive of her, and you know, she got, you know, some good tips and all that. So yeah. And I guess I would refer to her as a drag queen. So I mean, there's, you know, there's where some value is for me. You know, I didn't feel threatened by her in any way, or that she was, you know, messing with my gender dysphoria. She was just playing with the kids. So anything else on that issue? Value, drag.
It's transgressive. And in my mind, almost anything that violates the norms is probably a good thing in our rather heterosexist conventional society. The Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence will never be taken for sisters in the Vatican, but they are transgressive. They are transgressing against just about everything imaginable to make the point that we are different. We are not the same. Even if we are cisgendered and identify as such, we are not the same. And this is a variety of difference.
Right. Yes, that's a wonderful point. You know, it just, you know, it's subversion. It's bringing that into the mainstream too, and it's the way I would phrase it is queering up gender, but also just in the sisters and other forms of drag. I mean, just even the humor is you know, kind of edgy and sexual, and it's violating that vanilla sex, heteronormativity binary of male, female, reproductive sex, right? And it's something totally different. And maybe that's the best value for me of drag. I don't know all of it. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm with Nolan on that. It's very activist. It's very political. It's in your face. This is who I am, and this is what I'm doing. And diversity is okay.
Right.
Right. Okay.
I think that drag sometimes is an introduction of the queer community to the straight community. And it's a safe one for straight people. I mean, the drag is a performance. It's a performance art. So they don't have to feel threatened by it. And it is, like a first step of getting to know who we are.
Right. And that's an interesting question of how many straight people now are comfortable with drag. Obviously, I know many, many straight people that are comfortable with drag, but they're strong allies of the LGBTQ community to begin with. So I wonder, I guess there's, all around us there are inroads, even though I don't like drag. There was a drag queen story thing that was going on at libraries. Do you remember that, or was that just in San Francisco? I think that was all around. I think it
everywhere.
Yeah, where drag queens would read stories to the kids in libraries, and it was sort of controversial. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, to me, what do people think? Do you think that it's primarily still just in the queer clubs and events that we see drag? I mean, beyond maybe big staging things like RuPaul or whatever.
Well, I think it was Andy that said earlier, and I never really thought about it. I think it sometimes, I don't want to say causes confusion, but it's like, if you're not familiar, it's even hard within the LGBTQ community to understand the differences between transgender, gender non-binary, people that are drag performers. I think it's hard enough for us to navigate it just from our conversations today. I think if that's what's presented to them, they almost, straight people tend to kind of lump everything together. And it's interesting to look at that from the perspective of trans women, that a straight person may just assume, oh yeah, well, you're a drag queen because, I knew you, in your kind of the way you were born. Now I know you as a trans woman. But I'm curious for the trans perspective, do you think straight people kind of diminish, or they kind of assume certain things because of what the media presents, like a RuPaul Drag Race?
Yeah, that's the old story, right, Michael? In the the LGBT community, I mean, the argument between, should we put the drag queens out there in the big bottles of lube, that are blown up like a Macy Day Parade balloon, in gay pride, and do we do that, or do we try to adopt more of the heteronormativity rituals, heteronormative rituals of the binary male and female? And I guess, I mean, that's just an ongoing argument. I think trans people, I won't generalize, but for me, I think that trans people got left out because of that argument a long time ago. And now I think we have a lot more visibility and things are really changing a whole bunch. But I think the T got left out of the LGB, back in the 60s and 70s, where these arguments were, very important to, queer liberation. And it's like, I mean, at least that's the trope that I have for years in my mind. It's like, oh, we can't have the trans people or the trannies up front. We can't do that because then we'll never get same-sex marriage. We'll never, do this, right? And so I just, I don't know how much of that tension there still is. I think I'm going along with what you're saying here or responding to it. I hope I am.
You are. No.
I think this is a generational issue. I belong to an organization that is primarily comprised of queer people in their 20s and 30s. And the
Right.
conversation in that group, that organization, is very different than this conversation we have had today. There
Right.
is little to no question about the role of the T in LGBTQ plus in
Right.
that organization. And it is, I'm the oldest person, I swear to God, the oldest person in that entire 40,000 person organization. So
Right.
yes, it is my generation who had a hard time with, oh, I'm Nolan Madsen, my pronouns are he, him, his. I still get old people my age who stutter over that. Pronouns? Pronouns? What's a pronoun? It's like, so I would strongly encourage those of us who are of a certain age to engage in more intergenerational communication. And we will then have a better understanding of where people are today on this issue. And yes, you're right, the politics in the past has been bad because there were people within the queer movement who did not want to incorporate every one of those letters for fear that we wouldn't be able to get legislation passed. But I believe today there are young politicians who fully embrace the entire spectrum of who we are within that continuum.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nolan, is that a political group that you're
No, out in tech.
out?
Out in tech. People in technology.
Technology out.
Yeah.
Out.
OUT.
Out in tech. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All
No,
right.
I think we're seeing, I think because there's been not enough, but some progress on the LGBT rights, I think we're seeing greater acceptance, and I think it's more education of the older community, although being more willing to understand that we are one community, there's still a disconnect with how to handle it. And people tend to get nervous about offending someone or saying something incorrectly. Whereas I think when they're younger, the younger generation, Nolan, I used to be out in tech also. I used to work at Snapchat, so I'm familiar with that. And it's not an issue. It doesn't come up. You just, whoever somebody wants to be identified and how they identify, that's how you refer to them. We, older generation aren't wired that way. And I think conversations like this help increase our awareness, and we learn about it. And the more we learn, the more we share within our extended networking community, the better chance we have about being agents of change versus just being allies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Ruth. Yeah.
There's been an enormous amount of conflict between the old lesbian community, and not the young lesbian community, but the older lesbian communities and the trans community. A lot of it based on some of the things that happened at Michigan Women's Music Festival, right, and a lot of controversy. And I know I try very, very hard with that part of the community in which I'm somewhat active, feminist community, to build some bridges. And it's really, really hard to get old lesbians to have any sort of feeling for or empathy or understanding of the journey of transgender people. It's quite a problem.
Right.
And the older feminists called TERFs, and that's very, they don't like that. They don't like the term cisgender, though I have no problem with it. It's a very descriptive word.
Right.
It's really, I don't know if anything can be done, but I'm trying.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so we have a couple more minutes, so maybe we should just kind of wrap up with anything left to say.
I would like to say one more thing, because
sure,
if my partner we had not separated, had she changed and gone to we would have been able to legally marry
Right,
while she was still a woman,
right.
but identified as a man. And that the inconsistency of some of that is just, but that was the route we were taking, that we would have eventually been able to marry with her still being a woman, just identifying as, but she was a man. I mean, her mind, and I understood that. And I saw her agony through it all and the suffering. So that's what we have to.
Do you think that would have changed a great deal in your relationship if you would have been able to marry?
Well, that's probably what part of what broke us up, because she was 4'10" and I was 5'6" or 7, and she was going, I don't know, the dynamics and the people who were saying how much they hated transgender. I don't know exactly what happened at the end, but I don't know, but I think we would have looked, and I'm image, which I have none, but we would have looked very strange with her being the man at 4'10" and I. But there are couples like that, but that was the reality. So for whatever that brings in, but she was a great person. She is a great person, I'm sure. Sometimes.
I roll, huh, Barbara?
I'm not saying a word. I'm not saying a word. I'm being good, sort of.
Thank you for sharing. Who wants to say some closing up type of thingies about drag? I think drag is it's a way to discuss some other issues, isn't it, in our queer community? I think that's what I see from our discussion today. You know, how we were talking about drag, but we ended up going, you know, down these paths that, like we just did with, you know, same-sex marriage, and people maybe they're being older and didn't experience that, you know, when they were younger, and how that influenced their lives, and it's important to be reminded of that. And so I like that is drag talking about it, where we get into these other things, you know, as well. So who else wants to go?
Well, thank you,
Annie.
Thank you, Annie, for leading a discussion into this topic, because normally I wouldn't have, I don't think any of us would have been engaged in it.
Right. Thank you.
I think what we need to be aware of is that we all we need to be sensitive to each other's stories, and we are who we are. And we shouldn't.
And we have a right to be who we are.
We have a right to be who we are. And, you know, it's LGBTQ. I mean, it's all, we're all connected because we're all marginalized. I mean, let's not get after each other. Let's be with each other and sensitive to our stories.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree with the strength of all of us together, for sure. It would never done.
Thank you very, very much, Annie, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to more conversations.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, we're planning something for next month, and
Good.
everyone have a happy holidays. I'm going to
Stay
say
safe during the holidays.
Yes,
Yeah.
be safe and be
Stay at
healthy.
home.
Yeah. Be safe.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Say hi to Tommy for me.
I
Me
will.
too. Me
Thank you
too.
for- Thank you, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm going to stop the recording now.
All right. Bye.